I don't understand why there's so many staples. This is insane.
Yep, you heard that correct, staples. But before I get into that, hi, I'm Andrea from Andrea Flipping Unique. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for joining. So if you've seen a few of my videos or you follow me over on Instagram, you know why I picked up this nightstand. I love previously painted vintage furniture, and not just painted, poorly painted. There is just something absolutely thrilling to me to get all of this icky paint off a piece and give it a totally new lease on life. I live for it. So continue watching and see what I do to save this nightstand. 99% of the time, I start off my pieces by cleaning them, but this one was definitely a very rare exception. I can only assume that the previous owner was trying to gift wrap it for me before I came to pick it up, but instead of using tape, they used staples. Other than that, I have zero idea why this was even a design choice. But I spent a good about 20 to 30 minutes removing all of this paper and all of these staples.
I don't understand why there's so many staples. This is insane.
So after removing what I thought was the last of the staples, I started cleaning it, and I like to use Simple Green. I buy it in the gallon concentrate and just mix it in my spray bottle, and it works really, really well. I then went to clean the inside of the drawer and discovered more staples.
What the hell? Oh my God. What is this? This is nuts.
Not only were there more staples, but those staples were used to hold down some paper towels and what looked like to be a piece of a plastic tablecloth that resembled wood. So I'll at least give that to them, that they were trying to line the drawers. But other than that, I don't know why there were so many staples. Okay, I think all the staples are gone. If I find another one, I'm gonna scream. The next thing I had to do was to remove all of this paint, and I always start off with my carbide scraper, but this paint was really tough and only the top layer was coming off. So my next go-to method if my scraper doesn't work is to actually use a heat gun. If you've never used this method before, it's actually pretty simple. You just need to set your heat gun. I like to set mine to about medium to medium high heat, but it all depends on the thickness of your paint, what the paint is attached to. And then you just take your heat gun and run it over the area. You don't want to touch it directly to the paint, but just slightly above. And you're just looking to kind of warm the paint up and melt it a little bit. It's not going to turn into liquid, but it will soften it up enough that you can just take a scraper and scrape it right off. I also want to say, if you do use this method, please wear a respirator because you don't know if these paints are throwing off toxic fumes when you heat it up, and I don't want to be responsible if you get sick or injured. After I removed the majority of the paint with my heat gun, I moved over to my orbital sander to take off the rest. I did use 80 grit sandpaper on this only because A, I knew that I was going to be replacing the veneer on the top, and B, I knew that I was going to be painting the body of it, and I was not concerned about ruining the veneer underneath. I have been asked before why I choose to remove all of the finishes off of my pieces as opposed to just scuff sanding, and I do this for a couple of reasons. I've had some issues in the past where previous finishes interfered with the ones that I put on top, whether that was error on my part by not scuff sanding enough or the finish itself interfered with the new paint that I was putting on top, and it caused adhesion problems for me. And I've also had cases where I thought I scuff sanded enough or it felt and looked like I did, and you could actually see the old finish underneath the new finish. So to save myself some headache, if my piece is wood, whether it's solid wood or veneer or plywood, I just go ahead and remove all of the finish. And if it's MDF or laminate, those I have no choice but to scuff sand. Hello everyone. I don't know what that was. Anyway, I wanted to stop and take a moment. I was sanding the rest of the paint that was on here. And before anybody freaks out, I am going to be replacing this veneer. But I wanted to stop in case you didn't know. I burned through some of the veneer here, and I thought it was a good teaching moment. So if you don't know what veneer is, it's just a really thin piece of wood that is glued onto a substrate, solid wood, particle board, something like that. And if you are not careful sanding or even using your carbide scraper, you can sand right through it. So this lighter wood right here is the substrate, and then the orangey wood is the veneer. And the same with your carbide scraper. If you're not careful, you can end up chipping this right off. So I wanted to show you live what happens when you're not careful sanding. So you can see how thin this veneer is that I sanded right down to the substrate. So if this does happen to you and you are trying to restore a piece, it's not the end of the world. You can do color matching. I've done it before. But again, this is what happens if you're not careful sanding. And we all do it. I still accidentally do it myself when I am trying to save veneers, so it happens. But you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but there's little staple marks everywhere. And this veneer wasn't really in good shape anyway. It was chipping right off really easily. And there's a lot of spots all over this piece that it's failing. So I have some leftover walnut veneer that I do plan on using to cover the top, and then I have some walnut edge banding. And if I have any left over, I will do the drawer front as well. So there you go. The other big thing that I had to tackle was removing the bottom of this nightstand so that I could build a base. I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. One, I'm personally not a fan when furniture sits directly on the floor. I like there to be some sort of legs or base underneath. And two, the sides of this were actually made out of particle board, and somewhere along the lines they got wet and caused it to swell. So after removing all of the screws that were attached to the base, the next thing I had to do was cut it. And before I cut anything like plywood or particle board, I always put some painter's tape down. That way it prevents the wood from tearing out and I'm left with a nice clean cut. After the tape was on, I made a line as to where I needed to cut, and then I used some scrap wood and clamped it down to the piece to make a makeshift saw guide so that I could stay on that straight line. After I had both sides cut, I did grab my orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper just to even out those sides a little bit more. I also needed something that my base could attach to, so I had to build some supports underneath. So I just cut out some scrap wood that I had laying around, made sure everything fit correctly, and then I glued it and screwed it in. Also, here is me making a gigantic mess. The base that I made for this nightstand is the same base that I made for my cabinet in my previous video, so if you want a more in-depth tutorial on how I did that, then I'll have that video linked at the end. If you did watch that video, I did cut my legs out using my jigsaw again. However, I didn't have to use my router to get the rest of the curve out. I was able to cut close enough, and all I had to do was use my orbital sander to smooth everything out. The other thing that I did differently on this base than I did on my cabinet one is I cut my legs with the grain going in the correct direction. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, on my last base, I cut the legs with the grain going horizontally, and that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to do it with the grain going vertically so that they're more structurally sound. So I ended up doing that this time, and I didn't have to use the back skirt. After I finished building my base and attaching it, it was time to move on to the veneer. You want to start off by measuring the surface that you're going to be attaching your veneer to, and you're going to want to add 1/4 to 1/2 inch extra on each side. This will allow you to have a little bit of extra wiggle room when placing your veneer on. I then measure out what I need on my piece of veneer and cut it out with a pair of scissors. And make sure you take into account which way you want your grain to go and that you are measuring correctly. The veneer that I get does come in various sizes and wood species, so if you're interested, I'll have it linked down below. It also comes in a peel and stick form, so if you don't feel like dealing with all of the glue, that is always a good option for you as well. There are different methods and glues that you can use to attach veneer. I prefer to use contact cement, and I like to apply it with a chip brush. I also like to make sure that I'm wearing gloves and definitely wear a respirator with this stuff. You want to make sure that you apply the contact cement to not only the veneer but the substrate itself. This stuff will only work if both sides have the glue on it. So if you are applying it with the chip brush, you want to apply it just like regular paint and make sure that you're brushing in all directions. And if you prefer to, you can also apply this with a paint roller. Before applying the veneer to the substrate, make sure that any holes or dents are taken care of because those will be seen through the veneer, and make sure that any existing veneer that is on there is glued down securely. This contact cement needs to be dried before you attach the two pieces together, and when it's dry, it will have a shiny matte look and will be slightly tacky to the touch. And this is what I mean when I say that when it's dry, it has that shiny matte look to it, where when it's still wet, it still looks wet. And this is what I mean when I say it will only stick to other things that have the glue onto it. One of these pieces has the contact cement, the other one does not. When I fold the piece in half that does have the contact cement together, you can see that it gets stuck. When attaching your veneer piece to your substrate, it is highly recommended that you use dowels underneath so that it holds up the veneer a little bit till you're ready to place it down. I did not do that here, and luckily I was able to get my veneer up without ripping it and place it down correctly the second time. I've done this a couple of times, and every time I keep telling myself, use the dowels, and I don't do it, and that's what happens. So please use this as your what not to do when applying veneer. After the veneer has been placed, you're going to want to use pressure all over the top to ensure that the two pieces stick together and that you remove any air bubbles that may have occurred. You can do this by using a special tool called a J-roller, which is a rubber roller, or you can do what I'm doing here, which is a little tip that I learned from one of my friends. Her name is Lori at My Faux Chateau over on Instagram. And she taught me to take a piece of wood and wrap it with a cloth and use that to apply pressure. After you've applied pressure all over the veneer, the next thing you're going to want to do is trim off any excess, and I just do this using an X-Acto knife. After all the excess has been cut, you're going to want to go back in and feel for any rough edges, and if there is some, then just sand them off with 180 grit sandpaper. After everything has been trimmed and sanded, the next step to do is to add the edge banding. And if you don't know what edge banding is, all it is veneer that is on a roll and it's been pre-glued, and in order to attach it, you're going to want to use an iron to heat up the glue. Edge banding also comes in several widths, so make sure that you have the correct size for the piece that you're working on. I like to cut my strips so that I have a little bit of extra on either end, and then I take the top edge of the edge banding and line it up with the top of the veneer that I just placed down. When I have everything lined up, then I'll take my iron, which is set on low, and start to melt that glue so that it starts to stick. I then like to go back in and take my iron right up on the edge and really melt that glue out so that the two edges become one seam. Any extra glue that has come out should just peel right off. After I'm done attaching the edge banding, I go back in and remove any excess with an X-Acto knife, sand any edges down smooth, and then repeat the process until all four sides are done. I do let all of my veneer sit for about 24 hours before I add anything onto it, just to make sure that everything is dry, and after it's been sitting, then I'll go ahead and apply my stain. I am using We Refinish wiping stain in the color Royal Walnut, and I did thin it down a little bit with their pre-stain so that it wasn't as opaque. After my stain was on, I had to let it dry for at least 6 hours, so I decided to go ahead and start priming my piece. I like to use Zinsser 123 primer. I'll do a coat, let it dry, sand it with 400 grit sandpaper, do a second coat, and then sand it again. After the primer dried, I went in with Behr Dynasty's black and I did the same thing. I did a coat, let it dry, sanded it with 400 grit sandpaper, and then did a second coat. Because my base was oak and the veneer that I used was walnut, they were two completely different colors. So I ended up having to make my own stain so that the base would match the top. Now, if you're wondering what I'm using here, We Refinish is coming out with a make your own stain kit, and it comes with the stain bases and any colorant possible that you could imagine. The stain base that's in this container now is a mixture of some of their pre-made stains, but the color was a little bit too warm, so I needed to cool it up, and I added some blue, some magenta, and I did end up adding a little bit of green afterwards too. The other great thing about this kit is you will be able to add these colorants to any water-based product. So if you're looking to make your own toners or to make neutralizing paint washes for your woods, this would be a great option for you. And you will be able to get these colors individually if you don't want the whole entire kit. I do want to say a special thanks to We Refinish for gifting me this kit, but I will say I would have purchased it on my own because I really do truly love their products. So if you love supporting small businesses and you're looking to venture out to try new stains, definitely go check them out. I'll have their information linked below. After I got my stain color to where I wanted it, I then went and top coated everything, and I like to use Behr's water-based polyurethane, and this one is in matte. I ended up doing 3 coats of this top coat, and in between each coat I sanded with 2000 grit sandpaper, but you can also use a paper bag. I did run into a little bit of an issue on my first coat of top coat where there was a little bit of a bubble that occurred on my edge banding. This usually happens because the glue isn't properly melted and the water from the water-based top coat got in there and created a bubble. It's a super easy fix though, and all you need to do is just reheat the glue and push everything back down. But make sure if you do have some sort of top coat on that you do lay a cloth down, make sure your iron is on low, and just heat that glue back up. One of the last things I had to do was attach my handle to my drawer. I did make this handle myself, and the instructions will also be in the video that I'm linking at the end, so if you want to go check that out, you can. I needed to find the center of the handle and the center of the drawer front, and I ended up drilling a little pilot hole into the handle, a hole into the drawer front, and then I attached it using a wood screw. I also had to attach a new piece of backing, and I like to do this by drilling pilot holes first before I hammer in my nails. That way I know that my nail will go in straight and not crooked. I also decided to paint the other side of the backing the same black as the nightstand so that everything would go together. And last but not least, I just needed to line my drawer, and this drawer is curved and I do them a little bit differently. So what I do is line up the center of the drawer to the very edge of the paper, and then I trace out that curve and then cut it out. After it's cut, I peel off the back and line it up and smooth it out and cut off any extra as I would normally. And before I show you what it looks like now, I wanted to remind you of what this staple-infested nightstand looked like before. And if you want to see more furniture flips, restorations, and the occasional DIY, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and also hit that like button. It helps me out tremendously. And here it is now. I love how it turned out. My base turned out better than last time, and it's becoming a heck of a lot easier for me to do. My only regret for this piece is that I don't have a matching one, and that really sucks. But I at least saved this one from its staple misery. So if you made it this far, thank you for spending some time with me. And like always, let me know what you think in the comments. Even if you don't like it, just be respectful. That's all I ask. And I will talk to y'all soon.